sales in Florida, and I thought I would do it for another 25 years. And then I met this girl through a friend of mine, and her name was Renee. And when I met her, her life was in a really difficult place, a really broken place. And she was 19 at the time, and she had known a history of drug addiction and depression, self-injury. She had attempted suicide a couple times. And basically I had never heard anything about this girl, never met her, but my friend got a phone call, my friend that I was living with, and he said, "Hey, would you come with me to meet this girl? Maybe we could talk with her, maybe we could pray with her. She really needs help, and it sounds like she's on the fence, like she's close, she's thinking about it." And I remember it was late, it was after midnight, and I had to be up early the next morning, and I almost said no, just to try to be responsible. But at the same time, it felt really important, and there was a sense that, this matters, and for some reason I think I'm supposed to be in this car. And so there was a couple of us, and we jumped in the car, and went and met Renee, and she was staying in an apartment, basically an apartment full of college students near UCF, and it was a place full of drugs. She had been in a really bad situation for a while. She had been using that day, and came down and basically just was willing to listen for a few minutes. And so we just took turns just kind of sharing and inviting her to leave with us, to get help. And we tried to make it clear that we wanted to be part of that process. And she basically just said she wasn't ready yet, she wasn't quite there. And she said that we could come back the next morning. And I had to be away somewhere else in Florida for work. And so my buddy David went back and picked her up the next morning and took her in to a treatment center. And she walked in with a hoodie, and I didn't know any of this was going on at the time. And basically she still had a lot of drugs in her system. And the nurse at the treatment center asked her to take off the sweatshirt. And when they did, they saw that she had written the word "fuck up" across her forearm with a razor blade. And I say that not to shock you with a bad word in a church place, but to say I think this was what this girl believed about her life in that moment, that this was the identity, and these were the lies that she was buying into. And she had lived there for some time. And basically she was denied entry. This was a small place, and they didn't have a detox element. And they said that she could come back 5 days later, but they couldn't take her that day. And she came and spent the next 5 days with my friends and I. And I'm going to basically just tell you the abbreviated version, but halfway through that time, well, first off, we stayed up late every night. These were her first days sober, and there was a sense that it was such a privilege, the conversations that we were getting to have and the things we were getting to talk about. And we talked about grace, and we talked about freedom and forgiveness and sobriety, and were these things real, and were they possible for her? And there was just a sense that everything else kind of needed to be pushed aside, and we just had this amazing opportunity to spend time and kind of watch this girl come back to life. And I asked her a surprising question halfway through that time, and I expected the answer to be no. It was a really vulnerable question. And I said, "Hey, what would you think about the possibility of telling your story?" And like I said, I really just felt like that was an awkward thing to ask someone, and assumed she would say no. And she surprised me and said some things that I'll never forget. She said she loved the possibility that there could be a purpose for her pain, that other people might relate to her story, and maybe people could even find hope in that. And so we spent 5 days together, and then I sat down and wrote this story. And something we both smiled at when we realized this story was going to be written was that we didn't have the privilege of a happy ending. We didn't have it 5 years out. Like, we just had to be honest with what we had. And it was a really difficult story. It was dark, and it was painful because that was real, and that was where she had lived. And yet in the middle of that, she believed in hope. She believed in truth. This was a girl that knew Jesus, that had grown up in the church. And so I think you see this contrast of pain and hope, and really believing that things can change, and yet knowing that it's a long road and it's a difficult road. And I kept coming back to this title that felt way too long to be a title, and it looked funny. It looked like a Fall Out Boy song title or something. That went over really well. That wasn't even planned. That was off the cuff. Yeah, Aaron was going to use that, but he's not. So it was way too long, to be a title. But I was like, I think it's supposed to be the title. And so that was it. Wrote this story and sent it to some friends, and people were really moved by it, and people were really encouraging, and I was really encouraged by that. And then ended up at a Coldplay show. I don't know if it's cool to like Coldplay, but I really like Coldplay. Ended up at a Coldplay show in Orlando, and was sitting there, and there's something about singing